Welcome everyone to the webinar today, which is going to be about building management systems and being hosted here by the Northwest Net Zero Hub. For those that don't know, the hub is one of 5 across England, funded by the Department of Energy, Security and Net Zero to provide independent and free help to local authorities, communities and others. And it's our job to try and provide a bit of information and support in the transition projects to net zero and local clean energy. And the Northwest Hub is hosted at Liverpool City region, but we work across the Northwest region and have people work placed across each sub-region and with themed expertise located within Liverpool, but able to provide help wherever people need it. We're very fortunate today. We've got some experts that are here, experts in the field, and Tom, Niamh and Joe are going to talk about their experience and expertise in building management systems and how you can take the best advantage of it. So our agenda is going to go through each one, hear from them about what they can provide and give us direction on for good control systems. And then at the end of it, we've got back time for questions. So if people want to put questions in the chat as we're going along, if it's something that they're thinking about, or they could wait to the end and we'll have a session with everyone on board. But it should be a good session. We've got a lot of expertise to put across here, and I'm looking forward to seeing it. But just to set the context, building management systems is one of the keystones of good management of facilities. There can be a lot of wins and good efficiency by running a proper building management system and taking care of it. It's often something that's overlooked after it's put in or it's not well set up. And being able to get that intelligence back from the operation and the use and the occupation of buildings is essential to have something that becomes a good asset, working well, provides a lower impact on its use and its emissions. So it's a fundamental thing that we want to be progressing and keeping healthy and keeping the building going. So we're going to start off with Tom. Tom, if I can invite you to come in and give us your presentation, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Eddie, and welcome everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here this afternoon speaking to you on this important topic. So following the introduction, my name is Tom Kelly. I'm Managing Director at Inteb. We're energy and sustainability consultants based in the Northwest, based in Liverpool City region, more specifically in Birkenhead on the Wirral. And I'm going to talk through the kind of broader picture around sustainability improvement, reducing carbon, driving towards net zero, which will involve an element of better control and energy efficiency before handing over to Niamh and Joe, who are going to go into a bit more detail on BMS in particular. So just a little bit about our business. For those who don't know us, we are fully committed to a quality service delivery to our clients. It's what we call the Inteb way, and we have 4 pillars that we hold ourselves to in the business, and that's our attitude, the positive environmental impact that we can have, that unrelenting commitment to service delivery, and hopefully a nurturing environment which helps us to recruit the best level of staff, and certainly the next generation of staff coming through who expect that as a minimum requirement. And what our job is to do is to deliver sustainability. So we are committed to empowering all our customers along every step of the journey, and more specifically trying to overcome obstacles which inevitably you are going to get along the way to your net zero journey, identify what those obstacles are, come up with solutions for them, and we'll go into a bit more detail on the types of services we provide, but there are many. And part of our job is to know who can help us to deliver that from a partnership point of view. So deliver as many as we can ourselves as a business, and then reach out to other partners to deliver. And that allows us to provide a one-stop shop really to a lot of customers. And we invite them to contact us and pick our brains and say, look, I've got a problem with this. Can we talk to you about it? And we're there to help. So our approach to sustainability is effectively to set a maturity framework. So we try and understand exactly where our customers are on their sustainability journey. And we then hone in on exactly where the biggest benefits to them are. So that covers a sustainability focused service. So everything we do really, it may seem like we're approaching it in a roundabout way if we're focusing on data or green energy procurement, but it all has a benefit to sustainability because that's all we provide as a business. We like to provide a huge amount of expertise, so in-house, lots of people who've been doing this for years, lots of in-house experts, academic experts, to make sure that we know what we're talking about, which is obviously important. Linking into this particular event, we do take a data-driven approach to this, and I know one of the questions for later on is fabric first or data first. We are very much data first. It's all about collection of data because we understand that you need to collect the data to show you where perhaps your biggest problems are, biggest wastage, which then become your biggest opportunities. You need to collect the data after you've made changes in order to accurately verify the changes that have been done. So data, painful as it may be to collect, is absolutely key to all this. And what we like to try and promote is, obviously, we have our own commitment to sustainability. We like to see that from our customers. Naturally, there's a lot of legal requirements around this. So some of our customers, you could argue, have to do it. Others want to do it. And we feel that in the years ahead, there will be more of a demand for kind of true commitment to sustainability, which we think is important because it's probably the most important issue out there at the moment. So I mentioned before the kind of maturity framework that we employ at Inteb in assessing where our customers are on the journey. What we look to do as a first step is complete a baseline assessment for them, and that's where the data comes in. We'll try and work out where they are in terms of consuming energy, if they have multiple buildings across their estate or their portfolio. We try and work out which are the best and which are the least well-performing buildings. That then enables us to set accurate targets. So once we know where you're coming from, we can set a target, and that target needs to be smart. It needs to be realistic. So we have a chance of achieving it. And we will then set out a sustainability roadmap. And that could be to do with energy efficiency. It could be to do with building controls. It could be to do with circular economy, net zero. It's very much in line with where the businesses are going or the organisations are going and what your drivers are. And quite often they come from stakeholders or customers or legal requirements. Fourth step, we'll pick up requirements around compliance and certification. So we'll look at what pieces of law you need to comply with. We'll look at possible badges that you need to collect along the way that could be of benefit from a commercial point of view. And then we'll review and report on the whole process, and that can be part of your annual report, your net zero carbon reporting, etc. But that doesn't stop there. We then go back, reassess the baseline, and it's similar to the Plan, Do, Check, Act process that you'll see in things like ISO certification. It's kind of it's an ongoing cycle of continual improvement because that is how you want to improve as an organisation. We do find that if we implement these measures on a short-term basis and then step away, unless there's some real capacity building set up in place, you can revert back to old practices quite quickly. So it's important to stay focused on it and not just kind of do it as a one-off. So I mentioned before, there's quite a broad range of services that we provide at Inteb. What we've tried to do is, well, literally map these out in the form of a tube map. So they have a common thread between each of the lines, but ultimately they all do link into each other. And that's the point we're trying to make here, is that you may be approaching it from one direction, but actually it's all part of the journey towards something else. So if you're looking at net zero, or if you're looking at getting your EPCs or your decks done, or you need to do some bill validation of your utility bills, that all matters and it all counts. And so any one of these services, if you go on our website, you can click on them. There's a bit more detail, and at any point, we're happy to take questions about any of these, because they may not all be relevant to you, but I'm fairly sure some will be of relevance. And in a slightly different way of presenting this, what we do is we map out the same tube map services along that maturity pathway that we talked about before. So when you're looking at the bottom, you're looking at kind of baseline assessment. These might be slightly more basic entry level things. You're looking at consumption analysis, bill validation, metering, perhaps building blocks to get in place before you do your next steps. And as you're moving up, then you're going through some of the legislative requirements. You're going through some green building certifications. And then ultimately at the top level, when you get to net zero, this is where you want to be looking at things like ISO accreditation, greenhouse gas reporting, embodied carbon. We're not saying necessarily don't aim for the ones at the top before doing the rest, but it's certainly an awful lot easier if you start with the baseline and then you move up through the gears in order to achieve net zero. Because while we're obviously promoting net zero as a positive thing to do, and if done right, undoubtedly it will save you money and it will align your organisation correctly in the future, we understand it's not an easy thing to do. In some cases, it's quite an abstract concept. So there's a lot of explaining to do in order to get the idea of net zero through to some of our customers. And in a lot of cases, you just have to start with the basics before you kind of jump in too far. So that's a little summary of the services we provide as a business, just to kind of set the context. In terms of the topic around building management systems and energy efficiency in particular, I'm just going to go through three areas here, finishing off really with building management systems and data. And we've got a few examples of case studies along the way, but I wanted to set the scene in terms of the net zero transition, because this is what I would say, without exception, all of our customers are demanding to some degree at the moment. They're either setting their net zero goals because it's something that needs to be done from a legal point of view, obviously aware that from a public sector organisation point of view, with my time in the NHS in the past, we know that net zero is a huge requirement, but also from a customer, from a commercial point of view, a lot of customers at the larger scale are now requesting net zero information from their supply chain. So right throughout the broad spectrum of customers who we work with, SMEs, large corporate, industrial, commercial, public sector, third sector, this is a subject that binds them all at the moment. So a key part of net zero, probably the most key part, is the notion of energy efficiency. And that's because it's not possible to achieve net zero without making changes in your organisation. You can't just record your carbon emissions, say, actually, there's nothing we can do about that, let's offset all our carbon. Trying to think about it from a global scale, there won't be enough offsets to offset everybody's carbon impact. So each individual organisation needs to do things to reduce their carbon emissions, which in a lot of cases will come from excess energy consumption and energy waste. And so these are really key things to identify in the first place, and not just from a carbon reduction point of view, but like I mentioned before, from a cost savings point of view. If you don't delve into this in detail, if you don't look at energy wastage and you don't focus in on things like building management systems, you will undoubtedly be spending more money than you should on energy. More money is wastage, more money is higher carbon emissions. And like I said before, if done right, net zero will save you money. And this is why it's such an important area to focus on. So this is something that we spend a lot of our time doing. We support a lot of our clients with their net zero ambitions, and just being honest, a lot of our tasks are there to kind of sense check the targets that are being set, because perhaps 2 or 3 years ago, when this was very much on trend, there were lots of targets being set looking at 2030 or 2035 without really a plan in place on how to achieve them. Now, all of a sudden, we're a month away from 2026. If you had set a 2030 target and you didn't have a firm plan in place, it's going to be pretty hard to achieve it right now, because nothing has changed significantly from an external point of view to make that any easier. So perhaps time to address those targets and make them a bit more realistic. So some examples of working on net zero pathways or net zero planning with customers. We're fortunate enough to work with the Royal Albert Hall in London. They understand that they have a large environmental impact because of the amount of shows they put on, the amount of people who travel to their shows, the amount of performers who travel across the world to come to the hall to put on a show for their audience. Now, you think, obviously, it's fantastic what they do. It's very important. It's part of our heritage, but it also has a huge carbon impact. So they're aware that they need to do something to reduce, manage that impact over time, to make sure that they remain viable and kind of ready for the 21st century and beyond. So we're working with them to do that. Similarly, All3 Media Group, a large TV and film production company, they make a lot of TV shows, many of which you'll be aware of. I think the most recent prominent ones were the likes of Traitors and Celebrity Traitors, and they film locally in the Liverpool City region. They do Hollyoaks and filmed Grange Hill and things in the past. Other ones people might have seen, Geordie Shore perhaps, things like that. But again, they have a huge impact from an environmental point of view. They've got their locations, they've got their where they go out and do their filming, and they're really switched on to the idea of net zero and really trying to identify, manage, reduce their environmental impact. And then I suppose a bit more close to home, Brabner's LLP, large prominent law firm based across the northwest with offices in Liverpool, Preston, Manchester, and now Leeds. Real serious commitment to environmental improvement, B Corp, net zero target, and some really good stuff going on. So helping this business to manage and reduce their carbon emissions. Touching a little bit on the collection of data, and Niamh and Joe will go through this in a bit more detail, but certainly when you're looking at collection of data, you want to be looking at AMR energy meters, so smart meters, for want of a better phrase, and completing an audit of your BMS, of your building management systems. That then enables you to collect that data and do something with it. And as a good local case study for that, this was a BMS upgrade that we completed for St Catherine's Health Centre, just here on the Wirral in Birkenhead, earlier this year. And this was a fairly new building I was involved with back at the time, around about 12 years ago it was completed, but systems change, systems need upgrading and updating, and we worked with the NHS to do that. And they're reaping the benefits now, because it's a very energy efficient building, but it needed to continue to be so, not least of all to save money. And then from a data measurement, reporting and monitoring point of view, and apologies for all the acronyms in this one, lots of acronyms in terms of the benefits to the clients, but some case studies there, fascinating ones, completely different industries again, SKO, who operate a space telescope project. We know them from Jodrell Bank here in the northwest, but they have a couple of other projects in South Africa and Australia, and Churchill Group Facilities, who do things like manage the cleaning of Merseyrail, for example. So I think we're pretty much done on my side of things. We are, in fact. That's the final slide. So I'm happy to hand over to Niamh next, who will run through Fabric First or Data First. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom. Just going to take control and hopefully get the nod that is with me. We tried this just before we started, so hopefully I'm going to be able to move slides. So hello, I'm Niamh Allen. I'm the Managing Director of Sustainable Smart Technologies. For context, we are part of the Sustainable Investments Group, which is a £70 million turnover group of companies. We all sit under the umbrella of sustainable investments, and we are delivering energy efficiency and decarbonisation solutions to the built environment, looking at the main and focusing on, the 5 main crises. So cost of living, energy efficiency, housing, climate, and public health, and like I say, to the built environment. So as a group, we are able to, primarily in the domestic market, do everything from helping a local authority or a landlord to get their funding, to do the programme management, to do the physical installation of retrofit measures. The blue company is us, so the before and after monitoring of those interventions, and then also Permarock that do the supply as well of external wall insulation and render systems. So we were acquired by Sustainable Investments in November last year, so we've just done a year with the group, and our background was in commercial buildings, so we've done 8 years in the commercial space, so local authorities, aerospace, government funded business parks and authorities, and also have done work in the domestic market for about 4 years. So if I move on, we as a company are very much focused on smart building solutions. So we are going into businesses and helping them to get better data on how their business is operating. So we're looking at the environment, we're looking at energy, we're looking at occupancy. And I think the webinar today is all around building management systems. And I think a BMS controls the building, but monitoring will explain how the building actually behaves. So together, those systems work really well together. So we work really well with BMS consultants, integrators and partners, because we'll take the data out of the BMS and visualize it in a different way for clients. So to set a little bit of the context, I'm not going to touch on all of these, but I think number one, budgets are tightening, but expectations keep increasing. So, for example, the government have recently announced no further investment for PSDS funding, apart from existing projects, but they still want the public sector to decarbonise. We often see ageing buildings, legacy systems and controls which make it difficult to optimise. I've got clients that have a different BMS per site. I've got clients that are buying parts on eBay because they've still not upgraded their BMS and it's sort of coming end of life. Or you've got people that maybe have moved that used to operate that building management system, and again, it becomes very, very difficult. The feedback we get is that they're often on premise, they're difficult to navigate, the data is not easy to analyse. And often we find that data exists, but not in a usable format, so it's not actionable. You can't do something with that data. Move on to the next slide. While I was doing a little bit of research for this webinar, I found this study that was done by the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, and I'm only going to touch on the top 3. So the barriers to sustainability investment in buildings. Number 1 was high initial costs. Number 2 was lack of evidence on the return on investment, which my presentation will touch on, and lack of knowledge and awareness about the technology. So again, it's great that this webinar is being run, and I'll touch on some of these other points further on in my slides. So the typical issues that we're seeing in buildings, as I said, often outdated BMS, and often the schedules are just running 24/7. So they're set when the building was set up, and they continue to just run 24/7. We often see parts of the building are being heated even though it's got very low occupancy. We see things like air handling units running 24/7. We see often not very real-time data on things like temperature, CO2 or occupancy. Faults often undetected for months, and no sort of single source of truth for how the building is performing. So why would you start with monitoring? So monitoring helps you to establish a before picture, and you need that before picture to be able to do the intervention. So often what we find is clients will implement solar, they'll do air source, they'll look at, updating their BMS, and then they sort of still have this buffer of energy that they just can't reduce. And we think you should flip it the other way around. So start with your monitoring first, understand how your building runs, very quickly create a baseline. You've got no guesswork there, you know exactly how it's operating. You can start to identify ventilation or heating issues. You can identify if assets are being left on. And then you've got the evidence then for when you actually do the intervention. So I've got lots of clients that have worked with us to do the before baseline. They've then done voltage optimization on one site and understood the real impacts before they look to do that across an entire estate. Often what you find in the sustainability sector is 30% energy savings is the phrase that's often put on brochureware. But does it really give you 30% energy savings? And how would you prove that? Just take a sip of water, sorry. And then once you've got the data, you can see the impact of those interventions. Like I say, you can use that for setting, going for future funding, reporting, and for getting further investment. So sort of general points on technology. What we would say to a client, if I had a new client sat in front of me, is don't adopt technology for the sake of it. Make sure that there's a clear purpose for why you are doing it. Don't try to solve the management process with technology. So fix the process and that problem first. It's not, it seems easy just to throw money at technology, but then often that's why the technology will fail. Review what you already have. So when we go into any client, we first look at what systems do you already have? What data are you already collecting? Because if we can pull that data and visualize that first, you might not need as many additions. See the solution in action. So as a provider, I would welcome people here to see a demonstrator that we've set up at our office. I would provide webinars. I would show you, let you tangibly touch the technology and see what it does, or go and visit a client site that is open to me sharing that. So if you're looking for a provider, make sure you're looking for somebody that is open. And don't buy anything that you don't own or you can't integrate to your data and system. So we see so many clients that will get locked into a certain tool, a BMS, a certain panel, a certain system, and it makes it very difficult when you're looking to expand in the future. So just ask the question, is this open protocol and can I integrate with it in the future? And then what I'm going to do is just move on to some examples of what we do and try to hopefully give you some clarity. So here's an example of an occupancy-based solution that we did for a client. So this client is on an estate like this. So it's a large government-funded park. And we were there brought in to look at occupancy. They knew that utilisation was quite low, but they didn't have the data to actually move departments and evidence it. So we started to monitor the building, and we looked initially over a pilot of 200 desks, and we found very quickly that the data was sitting around 32% occupancy. So they used the data to actually now, they've closed the building. It was really costly, full of asbestos. It was really costly to maintain. So we're just waiting for the energy savings, and then this will be a case study that we're going to publish on our socials. But it's a really good example of how you can use quite simple data, so a sensor, to monitor how the building is actually performing. How do people actually use that building? So you've got the data, they're using that now for their rationalisation plans. They've avoided new builds because departments were asking for more space. So what they've actually done is use the data to monitor the building first, move the departments, and then monitored after. And then they're constantly engaging with the people to make sure that it is as the data says. And then I've just got a bit of an example. So the feedback that she gave, I'm not going to read all of it, but it gave us the clear evidence-based insight we needed to demonstrate that some departments were occupying more space than required. As a result, we've been able to close one of our buildings and relocate teams into existing offices with confidence. The data has supported every decision, showing that departments can comfortably share space while maintaining operational efficiency. And like I say, they have a building management system, but the data, they weren't getting that in the form that they needed in to visualise it. And I should say, this client needed it visualising in a certain way. She was a state space planning officer, and she needed the data for a monthly report. So we worked with her to visualise that data in a way that's meaningful. And then another example, this is a local theatre company to us that don't mind me sharing their name, so Horse and Bamboo. They'd secured some funding from the Arts Council, and they were looking at where they prioritise their sustainability efforts. They had a certain pot of money, but they also needed to do the fundamentals like getting a disabled toilet, upgrading their lift, and they were being pushed down the air source heat pump route. So they'd come to us, we were doing monitoring, we had all the data for the building, how it was occupied, how it ran in terms of energy. And they said, well, I don't think this is right. Is an air source heat pump right for our building? So we brought in our own M&E contractor, and very quickly they said, no, it's, you know, it will need new insulation, new radiators, new pipe work, and it also needs a new fire system. So very quickly we worked with that M&E contractor to replace, it was a very old boiler that they had here. We moved them to a more energy efficient gas boiler, and we saved them nearly £4,000 in year one. So for them, that was the right sustainability approach. And I think sometimes it's very easy to go with what's new and what's exciting, but is it right for the particular building? Again, another example, this is, it was a brand new building at the time, so this was about 4 years ago. And it had a brand new building management system. It had just been built, and they wanted us to do environmental monitoring. So temperature, humidity, CO2s, chemicals, because they were going for a smart building certification. So my client said to me, Niamh, I give it 3 weeks and I'll have all the data that I need, and I won't need to keep the sensors in. I said, okay. And they've renewed for their 3rd or 4th year license recently because the data told them something they didn't know. So very quickly, they used the data to bring back the BMS and the HVAC engineers, because actually the heating set points weren't adjusted correctly. So they'd been set at what it should have been set at, but it wasn't right for that particular building. So we reduced their winter heating spend by about 20% of their emissions, and no impact on staff because we also had all the environmental data. So the data was really useful to send it to the HVAC and the BMS to say, please will you come back and look at the data, it's not quite operating as we would like. So as you can see, the orange is where we were sort of ragging that as amber, and it was being overheated and underheated in certain areas. And then this is another example, a local commercial building run by a local authority, and we were doing a study looking at occupancy and temperature. So how was the building performing? How often was it used? Very quickly, this is one building that we identified, and you can see on the left-hand side is before, whilst we were monitoring. The black line is where we had a Teams meeting with the client, and then you can see after intervention. So the building was being heated at 22.5 degrees during the day, and then at night time it was going up to 24.5 degrees, 24/7, 365 days a year. So it was being overheated. We saved them £10,000 for that site straight away, just from one conversation of saying you need to adjust your BMS settings. And we weren't doing an integration project for this, so we just told them and they adjusted that. For the same client, they wanted it visualised in a different way. So I think this is something with sustainability, is making sure that you're asking for the data in a way that's meaningful for you. So this client wanted to understand buildings that were being underheated and buildings that were being overheated. And they wanted to know where should they target their efforts first. So that's exactly what we did. We visualised it in a way that was meaningful for them. And this is something that is difficult with building management systems. If you've got a building management system, you'll know they are notoriously difficult to navigate. Similar to what Tom was just saying about theatres, they're a great use case for energy efficiency. So this is just an example because I think it shows the sustainability journey. So this client came to us with a reduction sustainability kilowatt challenge, and they said, what energy uses can you reduce on my front of house refrigeration? So we put in sensors, we put in smart control, and as you can see, we turned the fridges on and off on a schedule based on when they had a show. So you can see February to February, 23 to 24. Fridges run 24/7. In 2024, we turned them on and off based on when there's a show. We saved them £4,000, and we saved them 70% of their front of house refrigeration. But it's a very small return on investment. So we said to them, can I look at your wider energy for the building? This is where I think the bigger opportunity is. So they let us do some sub-metering, we put in some CT clamps, and we took them from an energy bill to knowing exactly where the energy went within the building. So how much energy did they spend on a show day, a non-show day, and night time? And where did that energy go? So it is quite small down here, but it's showing you lighting, front of house, dressing rooms, pump systems. However they wanted it broken down is how we did it. And very quickly we identified that when there should be little to no energy, so night times and weekends, they were using about £63,500. So there's an opportunity there between £20,000 to £50,000 to reduce energy. Now there are some things you can't turn off, food refrigeration, security systems, but there is some huge energy saving to be had there. And then we took the client one step further. They had the data then to look at how the theatre production of the same production time, so 6-day run, how did these production companies use energy? One used 55 kilowatt hours, one used 650 kilowatt hours. So very quickly, you can use that data to change your billing models. And we see in lots of local authorities and buildings that are charging either fixed rates or not charging based on actual usage. So it can actually change the way that you do those models. And then this client used us, so they actually did benchmark us here as well, but it just shows you that once you've got the data, you can benchmark interventions. So they benchmarked LED, solar, hand dryers, voltage, IoT controls and BMS. So very quickly they decided that they were going to go with IoT sensors, voltage, hand dryers and LED because that gave them the best return on investment. So when we talk about sustainability, we always say try a small case study, try a small proof of concept and then scale from those savings. Once you've got the data, you can build the case for further investment. I know Eddie's come here, so I've got to wrap up quickly. This is another example. Again, a theatre company wanted to look at lighting controls for the theatre. Is it worth it? So we put some CT clamps on the lighting circuit. We monitored it. It would cost them £800 a year. We found about £200 of vampire load, so lighting running when it shouldn't be. It wasn't cost effective for them to invest, so they didn't do it. They moved on to the next thing. So it's making sure that the business case stacks up when you're looking at interventions. And I'm just going to skip one more because I am nearly done. And then this is an example of an energy slide that we do for an aerospace client, but the same can be applied to any industry. So we KPI'd this for a client. The meter panels that we're monitoring have probably 30 plus metrics, really complicated metrics, but all they were interested in was the electricity usage, the cost and the CO2 equivalent, and then giving them the consumption breakdown of their assets. So for this client, it was furnaces. And this is why they wanted it, because very quickly they can see energy consumption should be running, as you can see on the first two, at about 55 kilowatts. But as you can see on this one, it suddenly increased to about, that increased to 55 kilowatts. It normally ran between 15 and 20 kilowatts over a weekend. So why is that suddenly increased and what can they do to reduce that consumption? So they're using this project to monitor the furnaces and make sure that they're turned on and off when they should be turned on and off. But the data is really easy, it's really visual, it's very quick to spot things that stick out. And then one of my last slides is just around sort of common barriers and how to overcome them. So we often see data spread across lots of different systems, your BMS, your meters, sensors or spreadsheets, and it's hard to understand what the building is actually doing. So we suggest creating a simple joined up view of your estate so that it all comes into one platform, so your solar, your BMS. Old or locked in BMS systems are hard to use, so request open protocol, go for tech agnostic solutions that can give you easier and clearer control. Often buildings run when no one is there, so you can do some light touch BMS optimization like Tom was talking about, add some holiday schedules, link it to occupancy. You should see immediate savings. Space is underutilised but still fully heated, lit and serviced, so I would really suggest looking at the occupancy of your building. There is a big win in making buildings more efficient. Limited budget is what I said about starting small, scale from the savings. Limited staff capacity and technical expertise, request simple dashboards, remote support and low maintenance monitoring that doesn't require specialist skills. And also a big one is around staff resistant and union concerns, because this is something we've had a lot of and we've always been clear with communication, transparency and privacy by design. So really sort of next steps, start with your database line, review your existing controls and your BMS, identify some quick wins for the building, run a small pilot and then prove the savings and then use that results to secure internal budget. And I think that's the end of my slides. So I'll pass on to Joe now.
Great, thank you. I'm going to share my slide deck if that's okay, just simply because I'm on a Google machine, and so hopefully, does that come up? I can't tell off this computer. Hopefully that's come up. So, hi, this afternoon I'm going to talk to you about making the complex simple. So, my name is Joe Miles. I'm the founder of Atamate. We are a BMS company, a controls company, and I'm going to talk more about the technology in a moment, but we are also an M&E consultancy. So, we're building physicists.
That bar, I've put the safety things on the main fuse.
Sorry, is that?
I've just muted them, Joe. You should be good.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't sure if, apologies, I wasn't sure if that was someone saying they couldn't see my slides. So we're also a building service engineers, and so building physicists, so we're qualified to do all of the energy assessments and such like. We don't tend to do that work anymore. We tend to work with people like Tom, who will do that stuff. And we're also a construction line gold contractor. So again, we never install anymore, but we can do if need be, and quite often when we're working in local authorities, they want us to do that kind of work. So this afternoon, what I'm going to talk about is, I'm going to start off by talking about the technology that we would typically install, and just so you get an idea of what a technology is. Then I'm going to talk about the key data that you need, and so that's your metering and monitoring data. And then from that data, what is the value proposition that you get? And that really splits into three things. It's about the real-time control, and that's going to give you an immediate benefit and savings. It's about alerting, so informing the people on the ground about problems in the building, and then it's analysis, which is the longer term information that can then help you do things like, you know, move to net zero and that type of thing. So kicking off first of all with the installed technology, we use a Bluetooth mesh system, so it's very easy to retrofit. First of all, on the sensing side, we're typically putting something like this. There's a number of different types, but it's a sensor to go in each room that is picking up the key information you require, like the indoor air quality, carbon dioxide, volatile organic compounds, humidity, temperatures, occupancy, ambient light levels, a number of other sensors in that. And the other key bit of information we pick up, as well as picking up all the meters that you've got in the building, we pick up all the electrical meters, heat meters, gas meters, water meters as required, but also we can sub-meter. So we've got a low-cost meter, this device here, that can go into distribution boards, and that can measure up to 8 circuits, and that's very useful for both understanding where the energy is going, but it's also very useful when you get into the operation of the building for maintenance, because you can start to see if there's power draw on key circuits and where failures might be in the building. Then you want to control things. So to control things, we're typically putting in some sort of device, you know, like this. There's a whole variety of them. And you can either be controlling complicated things through a gateway. So you might be talking to an air conditioning system with Modbus or BACnet or infrared, or you might be controlling things directly with a relay. So a number of different ways to control things. The advantage of using Bluetooth is that you only need to get a power supply to devices, and then you have very short cable runs. It's all installed by a standard electrician. You don't have expensive subcontractors. Because you've got such short cable runs, you've got no fire stopping. Typically, it's installed while the building's in occupation. I'm assuming in this talk we're talking about retrofit. We do a lot of new build as well, but that, you know, that's another story really. We can provide local controls to occupants, and that's something that's quite important. By giving the occupants of the building control of the spaces themselves, that can be a real bonus. And again, I'm not going to cover that in this talk, but it's something that we regularly do. And we can install with existing BMS systems. So quite often customers are leaving their existing BMS system in place. All the data gets collected, goes over Bluetooth mesh, gets hooked up to a local computer, might be more than one computer in the building. That computer has 3 functions. It keeps the temperature in this room and whatever it needs to be, the air quality and so on and so forth. It pushes all the data up into the cloud and gives you access from the cloud. And the final thing that it does is it's quite a high level of cybersecurity. So we're now working with the MOD and the NHS and such like, so in terms of security of your data. So just wanted to give you a quick sort of idea of what will be going in your building. So very easy, lightweight, simple to retrofit into the building. So the next thing is metering and monitoring. And this is the core bits of data that we're looking to get out. So I thought I'd just show you some of that data. So starting with very simple time series of energy used in the building. If we go into this, slightly more nuanced, so you're looking at days of the week and the different consumption of different days. And here we're looking at the amount of energy over different times on a day-by-day basis. And the big black line is the average. And, you know, in some buildings, this would be very useful. Different buildings have different patterns of use. Here's another example. So this device that I showed you before, which would go into distribution boards, that's measuring up to 8 circuits. We've got 6 circuits on here. You can see, you know, the breakdown of where the energy happens to be going in this particular distribution board. And obviously we put some control in at this point here, and you can see that the heating loads dropped off significantly. So, you know, you start to get this kind of level of information because you've got everything on one joined up system. We'll come on to that a bit later. Here's another example of how you might display the energy. So you've got a heat map here. So what we've got is we've got days of the month down here, so roughly 30 days. Each row is a day, and then you can see it starts at midnight, goes through to lunchtime, and ends on midnight in the day. And essentially, the yellow color is showing low energy consumption, and then the pinky red colors show that you've got higher energy consumption. And this is a helicopter factory, and you can see actually that they're really well managed. They're only using energy during working hours. At the weekend and outside working hours, energy level dropped off. So it's just finding the right way to display the data for the client. We can also look at power. So we're not looking at energy now, we're looking at power. So this is how much the building needs instantaneously. And so this is really useful if you want to understand, let's say, if you're going to put batteries in, or if you're going to put solar panels on the roof, or where your energy is going. You know, and quite frankly, I tell you, most of it's going into EV charging these days. So, you know, understanding that is really useful when we start thinking about how we're going to decarbonize the building further. So moving away from the metering, if we start thinking about the monitoring of the building, and we look at this in conjunction with the metering, but monitoring, how's that space being used? And we've already talked about occupancy has been mentioned a few times. So straight away, you get an idea of the occupancy of different spaces, and that can be quite insightful in itself. We can start looking at the spaces and the temperatures. So what we've got here, the top orange line on each room is showing the temperature when it's occupied, and the darker brownie line underneath is showing the temperature when it's unoccupied. And so what you want to be seeing, assuming we're talking about winter here and we're talking about heating, we're not talking about aircon, what we want to see here is you want to see that the higher temperatures are when the building's being occupied, the space is being occupied, and lower temperatures when it's not being occupied. And, you know, that's beginning to start to see how control systems are not working or working. So you could do the same things on air quality. So this is humidity in the blue, same thing. And then here is on carbon dioxide levels. And this is quite insightful in terms of, for a number of reasons, this is useful, not only for how healthy a space is, but also it can be a really big source of energy loss in the building. And quite often we find that when we go into particularly public buildings, BMS systems settings haven't been changed post the pandemic, post COVID, and actually they're overventilating. So there's just too much airflow going through. That air needs to be heated or cooled, and you know, it's a big use of energy in that space. Okay, so that's the kind of information we're collecting. I mean, that's not all the information, but I'm just trying to, obviously only got 15 minutes, but just to give you quite a sort of short and sharp idea of what we're doing. So now we're going to use that information. So how do we use that information to create value for yourselves? And the first time is through control. So this is machine to machine, running the building more efficiently. So first example here of what we've got is got time series data. So it's over a couple of weeks. And the top line here is the temperature in that space. Then you've got when the heating's turned on. So every time that this electric heater gets turned on, there's a red line here. And then here we've got the occupancy. And so the occupancy is a combination of either a radar or passive infrared, like a security alarm, and also looking at decay and carbon dioxide. So they give you a good indication of if that space is occupied or not occupied. And before the line here, this is how, you know, typical heating system would work. I mean, obviously it's got no timing on it, it's just on permanently, but the system is holding the room at that temperature. Here we go into occupancy-based control. So now we're only turning on the heating when there's occupancy in that space. And, you know, we're seeing really big savings by doing this. I mean, it's not unusual for us to see 30 to 40% savings in most non-domestic buildings that we're controlling. And it's not only through the occupancy-based space, but it's also, there's a number of strategies that we've identified which, you know, can give really quick savings. And that payback can be phenomenally quick. I mean, the best performing buildings we've had have actually got payback in about a year. On electrically heated buildings, you're getting 3 years, and it's not unusual to get, you know, gas heated buildings, you know, getting 5 or 6 year paybacks, just because they're so inefficient in how they're being managed. And it's having the granularity to have that room level control. I mean, of course, we could do the plant level control as well, but typically this is just looking at room level control. Here's another example of using control. Here I'm looking at air quality as opposed to looking at temperature. So if we start at the top here, we've got the carbon dioxide level. You can see it's quite, you know, sort of jagged at the top. We've got the humidity, and again, fairly up and downy. Temperature, occupancy again in the green lumps. And then here is when the fan's turned on. And so you can see that the fan's been turned on and how long that fan is turned on for. And we've got a before picture And again, the same thing, that the lighter coloured purple is showing the occupancy air quality, and the darker is the unoccupied. And you can see that, you know, we're around sort of 1100, 1200 parts per million before the dotted line. And when we take control of the building, we flatten out the line, and you can see that occupancy is broadly the same. Obviously a bit of a gap here, but, and you know, the air quality drops to around 600 parts per million, something like that. So what you do see though is the fans turning on a lot. And so obviously there'll be more air going through that building. So there's more conditioning. So there's going to be a more bigger heating or cooling load in that space. But it's to give you an idea of how you can get the data and how that data is useful in you know, real times to improve the performance or improve that building. Okay, so the next thing I was going to talk about was alerting. So alerting is typically using the data to inform the building managers and the maintenance teams of issues in real time in that building, because they need to know straight away. So I've just picked one example of this, which is quite common, which is detection of portable electric heaters. So portable electric heaters are banned in most buildings, so fire risk, and you know, they cost a lot of energy. So here we've got, again, the energy coming out of the distribution board, collected from the system. Obviously, it's dominated by the orange bars. I'm afraid I managed to delete the code, you know, down here, but you can take it from me that this is the power circuit essentially in that space. And then if we add to that, we add some monitoring data. What these the sort of crenellation that the flat lines are showing is that's where the temperature should be controlled to. So if the system was working properly or the building is working properly, that's where the temperature would be. What we're seeing is the temperature is massively overshooting these lines, and also we can see that the heating's not on. So it's overshooting and it's not on. So it's a kind of slam dunk that that space has got portable electric heaters in. So the system would generate an email that can be used to notify building manager there's a problem and allows intervention, and you know that will reduce in a significant reduction in energy saving straight away. Okay, so the final thing I was going to talk about today was just a bit analysis. So now you're collecting this data, you're getting a real-time return from this data, you're reducing your consumption in building 30 or 40%, you're getting alerts which are reducing your maintenance costs, you're reducing your management costs, and actually now you're thinking, okay, how do I decarbonize this building? Or you might be looking at analysis data for other reasons. You might want to say, does anybody use the meeting room in the top left-hand corner or whatever? You know, should we reconfigure the building? But analysis is a sort of longer term. But sticking to the energy theme here, really you've got to understand why buildings use energy. And in essence, they use energy because of their form. So that the form is how well insulated they are and essentially how airtight they are. So how much infiltration, how much uncontrolled ventilation they've got coming through that building. And that's quite well understood, the building form piece. The biggest use on existing buildings, or the most controllable use, is around the occupancy of the building. And that's understanding how much that space is used and how people are using that space. And from those two, you can then determine your route to zero carbon. So typically in zero carbon, what we're talking about is replacing gas and oil boilers. And we're saying, how do we do that effectively for this building? And you know, the first thing we can look at is we could look at upgrading the fabric. Quite often that's very, very expensive, got long payback periods, can be impossible in many buildings because of planning and other constraints. So then you're looking at what systems you're going to be putting in. So how are you going to replace your boilers, you know, in this building going forward? Well, it could be, typically it's going to be an air to water heat pump. It might be an air to air heat pump, or it might be direct electrical. And the key variable there is going to be these two information. You know, what's the fabric performance and what's the, how much is that space used? And not only that, but the data can also allow you to understand if you do want to replace a boiler with an air to water heat pump, will it actually work? Is your heating system suitable for that? So if we start running water at a 55-degree flow temperature as opposed to a 70-degree flow temperature, will you be able to heat up your rooms? And so, you know, it's very easy to collect the data on that. So, you know, typically we've turned down existing BMS, which at this stage is typically controlling the boilers, you know, look at the flow temperatures, reduce the flow temperatures, and then we can measure and see if it's capable. Clearly, if the space is not capable of getting to temperature at 55-degree flow temperatures, then you're looking at a complete retrofit of your heating system. So this is why data is so critical to how we refurbish these spaces and how we go down that route to decarbonisation. So yeah, so that's me. So I'm just going to say in summary, you know, obviously today's been very much about energy. There is actually sort of 5 value propositions that we bring to data or in the building. So the first value proposition is around the energy. The second round is around wellness, so understanding the health of the building, and that can be the air quality, it can be water. The third one is around reducing maintenance costs. By having better data, you can reduce maintenance. The fourth is around security and the security of the occupants. And again, things like door entries and also burglar alarm type equipment. And then the final one is around the management of the building, reducing costs of the management. So yeah, thank you very much. That's me. Thanks, Eddie.
Thanks, Joe. That's been really insightful. Thanks very much to everyone for the presentations there. We've got a bit of time to offer any questions. But before we start, I got one for myself. So you've all highlighted that it's a complex subject, and you've all mentioned that systems can be unattended, and that leads to consequences. So what do you think would be the first steps to engage for someone who's got a building and feels that the building management system is not up to date or working? Tom, would you like to start?
Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Eddie. Certainly, we would have a look at the when the system was installed, what it was designed to manage, and what the operational parameters were set up as. So if it's part of an ongoing maintenance regime, or if it's had an audit completed on it. If it hasn't had for a while, then that would it would certainly bring some alarm bells. You know, we'd have a look at this as a priority. Perhaps if detailed data is available, we will be able to tell, a bit like Joe alluded to in the previous slides, if the building isn't performing properly, and it would point towards the BMS. But certainly we'd have a look at the BMS, the installation date, the maintenance, and whether changes have been made to it, and we would kind of do that as part of a BMS audit, really. The ideal would be the system itself is absolutely fine, it just needs a bit of care and attention and perhaps some reprogramming, because really you're not delving into CapEx costs then, you're just spending a bit of time and money on a BMS engineer to come and have a look at the settings. And that's usually the most satisfying win, is where you can make a few tweaks and you can slash your energy costs and consumption significantly. So yeah, that would be my recommendation.
Great. Niamh, you spoke about quick wins. I'm sure that's a common thing in most existing buildings.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just on the BMS side, I'd do exactly what Tom said. I couldn't have put that better myself. But I would go alongside somebody like a Tom, or like actually Tom's team would work really well with what me and Joe do as companies. So I think go alongside, reach out to even ourselves, or look for a company that can come and do an audit of your BMS. But yeah, quick wins are, you know, lots of things. I think there was a question in the chat about, can you start small? And I recommend that. I think start with something small and scale from the savings. I think that's been my message today. So yeah, lots of quick wins. Once you start to measure something, what's the famous say? If you don't measure it, you can't. If you don't monitor it, you can't measure it. You know, it's like blue sky thinking, isn't it? But it is really true. Is once you start to submit to your building, once you get better data on your energy, your environment, your occupancy, how does your building actually perform? When do people actually use your building, and how does the environment perform? Once you've got those three sort of data metrics, it's really easy to see overheating, underheating, assets being left on, high base load of energy. Lots and lots of things can be done, but like I say, you need to start with the baseline first.
Great. Joe, you mentioned alerts that can come from the systems. Do you find that's a good tool that people are able to use to engage more with the control system and the performance of the building?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the term dashboard is totally incorrect for a building. I mean, there might be some buildings where dashboards are appropriate, where you might have very high level of staff, oversight. But for the vast majority of buildings, people are not going to be looking at a screen and looking, it's like watching paint dry, essentially. So what people want is they want notification when there's a problem, and then they can resolve it quickly. So really, you've got these three tiers. You've got this first tier, which is the building just running itself more efficiently, and that's clearly the control system. The second thing is this telling you when there's a problem, and that's going to the appropriate people, and that's the alerting. And the third thing is really the data reviewing, and that's done at a sort of consultancy type level. and that's a much more sort of slower and more in-depth process. And it's normally you're setting out to answer a question at that point. You're saying, you know, I think I've got a problem in this building. I think I'm not using the space well. I think I'm losing too much energy. You know, and then you dive into the data to sort of solve those problems. So yes, alerting is one of the 3 core reasons for data.
That's great. Well, if anyone has a question, they can raise their hand and join at this stage. But in the meantime, I'm sure you'll all be able to see that there are ways that you can save money quite quickly and simply by reviewing and taking control of your building control system.
There was one, Eddie, I don't know if you've seen the Q&A section when Joe was talking. There's one about how are you measuring building occupancy. I think me and Joe might have different answers, but that could be one we could answer. If Joe wants to go first, or I can.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, so there's 2 ways. I mean, ideal just saying if a space is occupied or unoccupied, and that's the first way of doing it. I mean, the second way that we can do it is we can pick up Bluetooth devices, and so we get a pretty good handle on the number of people. But you know, that's and then you get an idea. But of course, that's not 100% accurate because not everyone has a Bluetooth device on them. So children and elderly, but that can be a very useful indicator if you're trying to count people. And of course, the third way is that you integrate with a counting tool, and that might be appropriate in some spaces, but it tends to be more expensive. But you know, there are sensors on the market that can count people in and out of spaces and such like. So you know, those are your sort of 3 options, I think.
Just to add to that, we as a company do a fair bit in occupancy, so sensor related technology. So we're doing overhead sensors. So one sensor could cover an entire space. So it's almost like a machine vision sensor that's just looking for an object moving past that space. We've got desk occupancy sensors that monitor both the presence and the heat detection of people. And we have sensors that do line breaking as you walk past a space. And Joe mentioned it in his presentation, sort of like PIR sensors as well that will just detect somebody is there. But we do everything from sort of someone is there right down to a desk is utilised. But also lots of ways of integrating with Outlook booking systems and lots of different ways of doing occupancy, really.
Yeah, just building on from what you've phrased there, Niamh, this was a long time ago, so I'm really pleased that building occupancy sensors have developed, because we incorporated building occupancy with energy auditing for an NHS client of ours some years ago. And they were really keen to incorporate this into their estates strategy and their rationalisation strategy. And it was quite incredible the results you get once you carry out occupancy monitoring. You know, there was a kind of gut feel from the estates manager that said, I think we're underutilising this asset. It's not quite working for us, but we don't really know to what degree. We did the assessment over a period of weeks, and it was as low as 25%. Occupied. And this was before, I suppose, recent changes in terms of agile working, hot desking, and even before COVID and kind of the invention of Teams and Zoom and things.
Yeah.
So this was people physically coming into the office and the space being used a quarter of the time. So it was a huge waste, and we quantified it. Yeah, in terms of energy savings, cost savings, and they built it into their estate strategy and got rid of a load of leasehold properties. So it made sense, really.
Yeah, so I mean, Tom, we find that you know, especially in local authority building. I mean, we've had the whole building which has had less than 6% occupancy in local authorities before, the whole building, and you find that in many buildings now they've still got working from home. You know, they're working home Monday and Friday, so you know, to get a 40% energy savings is not difficult. So really, you know, the value proposition, the key thing where we find that we're saving the most energy is room level control. If you're, you know, and the point, so what we've developed is a system which is affordable enough to be at room level. So you're putting in control at every single room. And because at that level, you are controlling for occupancy and also things like air quality, and you've got interlocks between different systems. So you're not heating and cooling the space at the same time, or heating when windows are open and that type of thing. And so by putting in those systems, that's where the real value proposition is. And that's how we're getting the 30-40% energy savings in most buildings. And I mean, obviously it varies. I mean, if you're in a hospital ward, then it's clearly occupied 24/7. So, you know, they'll be putting the system in for different reasons. Typically, they'll be looking at it for wellness and for maintenance purposes, not for energy savings, because a control system won't give you an energy saving in a space which is occupied 24/7 basically. But I totally agree. I mean, you know, and I'm quite frankly, the more local authority buildings I do, as a taxpayer, the more shocked I am at how low the level of occupancy is. And, you know, I really question why we've got so many of these buildings which are, you know, very, very lightly used, quite frankly.
I think not to be too hard on the local authorities. Many of them are trying to manage that pretty well. But I'll pick up a couple of questions in the Q&A. So Andrew was asking about size of buildings, and I'm sure you'll agree it's horses for courses here. It's best system are the most complex, more likely to be in the more complex buildings rather than the simple ones. Tom.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about BMS here. I suppose we've not really touched on what you would call micro BMS. So there are scalable versions of building controls. Certainly bigger buildings, bigger, higher energy spend, more consumption, you're going to get better paybacks on, because the energy wastage is expected to be higher. But really, you can apply it at a relatively small level. And I think this does tie into the other question that was asked about submetering. If you want to, you can submeter a light switch. You know, you can look at, you fit a submeter and you can tell exactly when that light switch is being used. Realistically, you're not going to submeter a light switch because it's going to cost you a lot more than the potential savings you can make. So there is a balancing point there. But the general principles of control will apply to buildings regardless of size, because I think the purpose of the question that was raised is that actually you don't feel that you've got control of your bills. You think there might be energy being wasted. You just don't know where it's happening and how you can control it. So that's where the general principles of monitoring and control come in, and they will apply to buildings of all sizes.
This other question might suit you, Niamh, from Morgan, about the what if questions in buildings. And I think that's the essence of what the good monitoring does allow people to do.
Yes, absolutely. The what if type scenarios, we answer that for clients day in, day out. It depends what you are trying to achieve in terms of that scenario, in terms of answering that question. But yes, we can definitely look at how we look at, I think you've mentioned there, new factory or production lines, or if there's going to be additional consumption, we can definitely look ahead and do a bit of forecasting with you. That's definitely something we can work on. And just to pick up as well on the other question around, can you start, one was around you said start small with changing rooms and parts. Yes, absolutely. I've quoted a client today to do 1 room of occupancy monitoring because there's a bigger picture for that client. So I would say don't be afraid to start small. I think once you've got those savings, you build the case for something much bigger. But sorry, I just wanted to pick up on that point, Eddie.
No, that's fine. That's great. I was going to come around to that anyway. We'll probably get time for a bit more.
That's good.
A bit more comment. Joe, do you want to jump in on that point about size or monitoring?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, size makes, size doesn't really make any difference to us because Bluetooth is essentially infinitely scalable. So you could put in as many, we've done some very, very large student accommodation buildings because you could just create more networks. I think the maximum number of devices you can have a network is something like 216,000 or something. So we've never got to that size. So, and you could always have a second network or third network. So it's kind of infinitely scalable. Yeah, so sorry, that was one. Sorry, Eddie, on my little brain couldn't keep 2 things in it at once. What's the...
No, that's fine. That's fine. I think we're coming to the end anyway, but I've got one final question I'd like to ask. It's something, Niamh, you've mentioned, open protocol on systems. So people may be tied into systems. Is there things that they can do, even if they have got something that might be a bit more restrictive for them?
I think companies are, to pick up first, I think companies are moving towards more open protocol and it's becoming more common. So all the conversations we've had, like we've done quite a lot of we've done quite a lot of projects where we haven't physically installed anything. We've taken data out of a building management system, out of sensors already on site, out of systems that were quite difficult to get data out of, but sometimes having us, as an example, speak direct to that manufacturer can help to find a common way of talking to each other from the data. Once you unlock that, and you can visualize it in a better way, like a different dashboard or whatever, depending on the client requirements, it's definitely doable. You can't say that it is a yes every time. It depends on the manufacturer and what they're open to doing. But like I say, sometimes getting data people to talk to data people and finding a way that they can talk and they're comfortable with is a good way forward.
And do you find that there's lots of options for people? So, you know, the usual open protocol, Tridium, Niagara, but if you're adopting IoT, Bluetooth systems, local network systems, there isn't a restriction on that, making that change, is there?
No. For example, if you worked with us, we wouldn't impact the building management system. So we would work with the building management system to pull that data. So lots of clients will ask us, where Joe was talking about a dashboard, is sometimes the difficulty isn't that that the dashboard, you haven't got access to the dashboard, it's that you don't have the staff on site to be able to analyse that data and give you that insight. So pulling the data in from a building management system is a first step, but you have lots of other systems on site. But like you say, the IoT systems are typically open protocol. Like when we come to the end of a project, if a client didn't want to proceed with us, they would have access to the data and the sensors and could take that forward with another company. So we are open protocol by design, because we don't think you should lock anybody into anything. It's their data ultimately, and they should be able to use that in the future however they see fit.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and we'd agree with that as well, Eddie. It's so important, the argument about open protocol, closed protocol. When we talked about barriers and stumbling blocks before, in this kind of most critical of decades, and in fact the most critical 5 years of this critical decade, it would be a real shame if we said, look, we had all the tools we needed to decarbonise, but either we couldn't get access to the data or we didn't have the data that we needed. And you think that can't happen. And so closed protocol is really a thing in the past. It shouldn't get in the way. If you provide the details of the system, then there is a solution out there from the companies who are involved speaking here, really.
Great.
Yeah, and I kind of just build on that. I mean, so it's huge. So essentially, we're agnostic to the systems that we link, but obviously we weigh a lot on the Bluetooth world, because it's so much stuff is coming out at low price from China and Germany and other places. So it means that we can extend systems way broader than people anticipate. I mean, an example here is a German light switch, which has got it's energy harvesting, so it literally has no wires on it at all. We use that quite a lot. That can be linked into the system. But also we're doing things like we're linking in Bluetooth pillboxes for elderly care. So you can now, if you've got a bunch of elderly people in a hostel, or in a care home, you can actually check. You obviously can't tell they've physically taken the pill, but you can see that they've opened their pillbox, and you can check that they've that kind of information is available. So what's happening is on the management side of this, it's growing enormously, and also on the data side, we're in the process of building a app store. We've got quite a few companies that want to connect to our system to use the data that we're collecting. The biggest of which is Autodesk. So Autodesk, we've got a couple of factories which are we're pushing all our data up in real time, and they're running their factories, and they can see their production going through the factory on a digital twin, and we will supply that data going into that digital twin model of how that building's working. So data now is very, very fluid, and I totally accept. I totally agree with the others that this is the way that the way the world is, essentially. So yeah.
Great, thank you, and can I thank you all for your input today. It's really been fantastic and insightful, and I always love it when someone quotes Kelvin. So we're all in that kind of space. For the hub moving forward, we do offer BMS support to our partners, and we've got another few things coming up, so we're keen to see what interest there is for a further deep dive into some of these, if there's things that we can help with to make that knowledge exchange a bit stronger and better. So that just leaves me to thank you again for being there. Thanks to everyone for coming along. Get in contact with us if you're wanting us to come in and give you help.